Welcome to the InfoSec Insider podcast, brought to you by URM, the UK's leading information and cybersecurity specialists.
Hi, my name's Annie and I'm here today with Alastair Stewart, who's one of our senior consultants here at URM and also a certified QSA. Welcome to another episode of InfoSec Insider. So today Alastair and I are going to be discussing reducing your PCI DSS scope. So Alastair, my first question for you is, what does the PCI DSS define as in scope?
So the PCI DSS applies to wherever account data is stored, processed or transmitted, and they define account data in two sections, one of which is cardholder data, so that's the familiar stuff that you're used to seeing on your credit or debit card, the primary account number, the name, expiry date, and service code. And they also add on to account data something called sensitive authentication data, which is the secret data you keep to yourself. So that might be your PIN number or the CVV2 that's on the back, or the magnetic stripe data. So those are the two types of account data. And wherever that is wherever the PCI DSS applies. And so any components that store or process or transmit that data, and any components that can affect the security of that data are considered to be in scope of PCI DSS.
And what are system components?
Well, that's a good question to follow up on. There is a wide definition, I guess, of system components. Essentially, it's any component that is in scope of PCI DSS. And that doesn't necessarily have to be traditional things like laptops and servers. It certainly is, but it also can include applications, it can include software, it can use virtual machines, it can even include people. So if a person is taking a payment or they're managing the IT infrastructure, that person is considered a system component from the PCI DSS, and they are in scope, so are their accounts, and so are the processes and procedures that they follow. So a system component is a lot broader than you might think initially. There are examples listed within the standard of what a component is, but essentially any device or person or system that interacts with card data or can affect the security becomes a system component.
So how do you assess the scope of individual components?
Well, traditionally, we tend to scope in a sort of three-category system. So we start at category A, which are those sort of devices that directly interact with unprotected cardholder data. So they store the data, they process it, or they transmit it. And these devices are part of what's called the cardholder data environment, the CDE. If a device cannot decrypt the card data, so the data is encrypted and a specific device cannot decrypt it, then it's not going to be a category A device. It might fit into other categories, but it has to be able to decrypt and access the unencrypted card data to be considered category A. Any device that has unrestricted access to a category A device also by default ends up as a category A. They end up in the CDE. We tend to categorize those slightly differently, though. We put them into a category B because although they don't contain card data, if they've got unrestricted access, then they end up as a CDE device. What you try and do, as we'll talk about later, is get those devices out of the CDE. You get them away from the card data because they don't need to be next to it. Other category B devices are those that have restricted access. They have some kind of access to the category A systems, but they don't contain card data themselves. They are considered connected systems. They're connected to. And those are in scope, but some requirements don't apply to them because they don't have card data in them. The final category inside sort of category B, the final type is devices that can affect the security of other devices. So a prime example might be a firewall. A firewall is never directly connected to other systems, and it doesn't process card data itself, but it certainly can affect the security of those systems, and so it still falls into these category B devices. And then the final category is everything else which is out of scope. So you end up going, we've got category A devices, category B devices, and we try and move them down the categories as much as possible.
And moving on to scope reduction, why would an organisation want to reduce its scope?
Well, I'd hope scope reduction would be obvious. I would hope it would be obvious as why you'd reduce scope. Although the PCI DSS itself doesn't require you to reduce scope, you can simply declare the whole of your environment in scope. But you'd have to be slightly mad to do such a thing because there's a lot of requirements. So in terms of reducing scope, the key thing is to reduce the complexity of your compliance assessment in terms of number of devices that need to be compliant, number of requirements that would apply to those devices. So reducing the complexity, which as a added benefit will reduce the cost and the time, as well as reducing the risk to your organization. So there's a whole bunch of benefits and reasons why you would reduce scope, even though you're not actually required to.
What would you say the best method is for reducing PCI DSS scope?
Probably the most effective one that we do time and time again is network segmentation. So we segment up your network into different networks using any one of a number of different technical solutions, VLANs, access control lists, core routing tables, physical separation, or other devices that control the movement of traffic around your network. And we use them to separate out the devices on your network into those categories. So we try and move devices from category A to category B, because then there are less requirements on them if they're not actually directly interacting with card data. Or if they don't need to do anything at all, we try and move them to category C to get them out of scope if they don't need to be anywhere near the scope. So we look at all the devices and go, let's see if we can move them down. Let's see if we can put segmentation in place to divide these devices up into their different areas. You can even do segmentation inside applications. So lots of applications are modular, lots of web pages come in different modules and different ways of interacting with each other. And so if you separate those modules onto separate application servers and put them on separate network segments, then you've actually segmented the application at a code level to take some of the application out of scope. So don't just consider segmentation to be network. It could be application segmentation. It can even be physical segmentation of the physical environment in which people are taking payments. You have a call center, you have secure doors to make sure that people who don't need access to that room can't go in. So physical segmentation, network segmentation, and application stuff. That's going to be your primary method for reducing.
And how can encryption reduce scope?
Encryption is the other primary method. It's the one that comes highly recommended from the council themselves. But the key premise to this is if cardholder data or account data is not decryptable by a system component, then that component will not be a category A device. It might still be category B if it's connected to or can affect the security, but it certainly will not be a category A device. And you can then essentially use this encryption technique to be able to transmit card data across networks and around your environment without bringing those networks into scope. You can have a secure network inside and a secure network at another location. And if those are the two places that card data can be decrypted, whatever network it transmits across in the middle is irrelevant because it cannot decrypt that data and therefore would not come into scope. This is the kind of technology that underpins the newer standard for the PDQs and the card readers that's called P2PE, point-to-point encryption. That very technology underpins that in that it's encrypted in the card reader and cannot be decrypted until it gets to the bank at the other end. So everything in the middle is descoped. The types of encryption that you can use, obviously there's normal standard encryption, but encryption is often used in something called tokenization. And this is whereby you have an encryption that's not reversible. You can encrypt the card data, but you cannot decrypt it. It's also known as hashing. And you might think, well, if I can't decrypt the card data, what use is that? But hashing is very unique in that each time you encrypt the same card number, you get the same hash. So although you cannot reverse the card data, you know that this hash was this original card information. So tokenization services that are normally provided by the banks and payment processors essentially turn the card data into an undecryptable token, and you use that token to make payments against. And the payment processor knows which token is linked to which account. So it's not actually a card data, it's an undecryptable card data, which is a very common technique for allowing you to store card data without having to store the actual data. You store the token instead. Another technique is known as truncation, which is essentially a bit more brute force than standard encryption. Essentially, you just remove the middle section of data. So you truncate the card number down to just the last 4 digits, and then you can't do anything with just the last 4 digits. You can still store those 4 digits, and you're not going to end up being in scope. So encryption is definitely another key technique combined with network segmentation.
So what about the benefits of outsourcing card data processes?
So outsourcing from a PCI DSS perspective is moving the responsibility for handling the card data to another third-party company. So this is known as a PCI DSS service provider. They take many different forms: payment processors, hosting providers, web developers, application providers. All sorts of different services can be provided to you, and they essentially protect your customers' card data on your behalf. It's the idea of security as a shared responsibility, which is a key concept in PCI DSS, sharing the responsibility for protecting this card data across different expertise in different areas of the industry.
So can an organization outsource everything and be completely out of scope?
Not quite. This is a question we often get. Customers will say, why am I responsible if the payment processor is handling the card data? I don't touch the card data. The PCI DSS repeatedly points out across the standard that compliance ultimately resides with the merchant entity. The merchant is responsible for ensuring the data is protected in line with the standard, regardless of how you break those responsibilities down between you and your service providers. Just because your website doesn't collect the card data doesn't mean it's out of scope. If we refer back to those previous categories we talked about, a category B3 device, is something that can affect the security of other devices. And if your website redirects to a payment processor, then it can be used to compromise the payment processor's website, and therefore it can affect the security. So you can't get yourself entirely out of scope. You can shift nearly all of the responsibility for actually doing the work to third parties, but ultimately you're still responsible for ensuring those third parties are doing the work correctly.
How do you know you can trust these organizations with this responsibility?
Well, that's a key component of the standard itself. There's an actual specific requirement, 12.8, which is built in, that dictates that you need to manage your service providers and ensure they are compliant, and you monitor their compliance status as part of your compliance. So it has 4 key principles to ensure that you can trust a third party. Due diligence, you need to make sure that you check that the third party can provide the services in line with the PCI DSS. You need to do service correlation, so you need to detail exactly what that particular service provider is doing for you and what their responsibilities are under the PCI DSS. You need to get acknowledgement from them that they will be responsible. So that's either in the form of compliance documentation or written contracts, etc., to say that they will be compliant with whatever is relevant to them, whatever's relevant to the services they're providing. And you need to have a program to monitor that compliance status on at least an annual basis, if not more often. So although you have to have a certain level of trust, there's also a certain level that you should check them and maintain them and monitor them to make sure, because you're going to be held responsible for the compliance, even if you are letting these third parties do it for you.
So what other script production techniques are there, and what else can you do to reduce scope?
Well, there's a lot of other smaller niche cases, and all of these will require some kind of expertise to dig into them and see if they're relevant to you. But some other examples are things like data removal. So just if you don't need to store cardholder data, don't store it, get rid of it. Be ruthless. Don't think, well, I might need it. If there's no real business case to keep cardholder data, then just don't. It's just easier that way. Another thing that we often use with our clients are something called bastion servers, or jump boxes are often called. Essentially, this is a particular server device that you put inside your scope to tightly control access. So the only way you can access the scope is through this bastion server. That allows you to segment everything on the outside of the bastion server out of scope and only allow in very strict access to the environment. You can go a step further than that with some new techniques in access control called zero trust architecture. You may have heard that term bandied around, and we've seen clients start to use this for PCI DSS. And it's the old adage of trust no one. Essentially, nobody gets access to anything, and all access is granted on a case-by-case basis. Each time somebody wants to access any system in your environment, not just PCI DSS systems, that access is evaluated before they're allowed in. The default access is to nothing. So that's a valid technique we've seen being used. Process consolidation, which is kind of like scope reduction, but not quite the same. Essentially, if you've got similar payment processes across different areas of the business, try and combine them into a singular platform. You might have multiple websites redirecting to the same payment processor, we'll move all those websites onto a singular web application, onto a singular web platform, so that you can control it easier and you have less servers around. Or if you are linking into a multiple different payment processors, maybe switch to a singular processor so you don't have so many different APIs or redirects to different payment processors. So try and consolidate where it's sensible for your business to do so, obviously. And the final one is the old seek professional help type thing. So essentially come and hire a QSA like us to just evaluate it. Come and hire an expert who looks at these things day in, day out, to look at your environment and go, well, actually, you could get rid of that server, or you could move these servers around, because we do it a lot. A lot of our work as consultants here is helping clients to reduce their scope. That's probably the bulk of our work outside of actually assessing clients. So we've seen it before. We've seen these things happen. We've got ideas that we've used successfully with many other clients. So just enlist us. We'll come along and we'll do our best to help you.
Amazing. Well, thank you for taking the time to sit and talk to me today, Alastair. And for everyone that wants to learn a bit more about this, we've got a blog on our website, urmconsulting.com, which is called 5 Ways to Reduce Your PCI DSS Scope. So please go and give that a read. And thank you so much for listening today. If you've enjoyed this podcast, we would really appreciate it if you could spare a moment to leave a rating or review at ratethispodcast.com/InfoSec Insider. To listen to more episodes, you can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and Podbean.
Thank you for listening to URM's InfoSec Insider podcast. For more information, visit our website at urmconsulting.com.